This is the first week of a new series called My Type. And during the 4-week series of My Type, we're going to look at 4 different types of personalities based on the Myers-Briggs personality inventory. There have been interest in personality types since the ancient Greeks, but in the early 20th century, a psychologist named Carl Jung repopularized the idea that we have various personality types, and we're all unique. But there are different types that you can kind of say, oh, I kind of fit that type, I kind of fit that one. And they can help us to uncover weaknesses in our lives, to know what our strengths are and maximize on those strengths. They can help us to relate to one another more easily. They can help us in our career choices. They can help us in our connection with God and with what life is all about. And a lot of the material in this series is based on a book called Please Understand Me by David Keirsey. If you would like to check it out, Please Understand Me. And Keirsey is kind of the acknowledged expert, I think, in the Myers-Briggs world at this time. There's actually, in your worship handout, in your sermon note section, there are 3 websites that you could go to and check out more information about your specific personality type. And one of those is Keirsey.com. Just a great resource, so you could pick this book up, probably used for a few bucks, or you can go online as well. And the concept of the Myers-Briggs is that there are 4 main personality types, and then inside of each of those, there are 4 more. So for a total of 16 personality types. And if you've taken the inventory already online, there's also a link in your worship handout to take this test for free online. If you've taken that already, you've gotten a 4-letter code, correct? Am I right? You've gotten a 4-letter code, and that tells you which of the 16 types you are. And everybody fits into one of these 4 main categories. If you haven't taken that test yet, you can just follow that link in your worship handout, and you can, for free, and you can see which category you fit in. Well, why would we do a sermon series involving personality types? Personality types aren't in the Bible. Why would we do that? Well, cars are not in the Bible. iPhones are not in the Bible. Chemotherapy is not in the Bible. Pants are not in the Bible. You know that? It's good to wear pants. Right? Can I get an amen on that one? You amen the segue. Do you amen pants as well? So there are lots of things, lots of resources, tools in our lives that we use to help us to make our lives better that aren't necessarily in the Bible. But actually, personality types are in the Bible because there are people in the Bible. And you could read through biblical stories, and of course, I don't think the Apostle Paul took a Myers-Briggs test, but you could look at Paul and you could say, you know what, I think he's irrational. Not irrational, a-rational. You can look at different biblical figures, and we're going to do that in the series, and maybe see who you match up with a little bit. But personality types can help us to grow in our relationship with Christ, and in our relationships with other people, and in our vocations, how we use the gifts and skills that God has blessed us with. What's more important in life than those 3 things? And if personality type concepts can help us with that, then great. There are lots of other tests, Strengths Finder, and you can go to a psychologist and you can take the NEOPIR based on the 5-factor model. You can take the MMPI. There are lots of concepts out there that could help you. But our goal is that we want to be better followers of Jesus. We want to grow as followers of Jesus. And if a personality test concept can help us to do that, then that's fine with us. And if you were to ask Jesus, say, Jesus, what does it mean to follow you? Here's what Jesus would say. This is the same scripture we read last week. We've read it a couple times over the past few months because it's the main thing. And we want to keep the main thing the main thing. Does that sound like a good idea? Amen. Jesus would say to you from Mark, the most important one, answered Jesus, is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. 4 different categories, and communicating a holistic relationship with God involving my whole self. In verse 31, the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So love God with all you are, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really easy to do. Correct? Or maybe not. Maybe that's actually one of the hardest things you could ever imagine doing. And so if I just tried to love God with all I am and love my neighbor as myself, well, there are these things called parking lots. And I'm going to leave here, and somebody's going to cut me off right after church. Are you with me? Have you ever experienced this? I've heard so many people say, like, you have so many churches in the Southeast Valley, and it ends as soon as they get in the parking lot. Like, the real world comes, and it's not as easy to love your neighbor as yourself. So it requires a growth process. If I just try, well, I'm going to fail. And I try again, and I fail. And I feel guilty. And I try again, and I fail. And I feel even more guilty. And I try again, and I fail. And I get into this try and fail guilt cycle that just puts up walls between me and God. I don't even want to try anymore. And so what we want to do is grow toward the character of Jesus, to be more like Jesus in our character, which looks like loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, your whole body, and loving your neighbor as yourself. The Apostle Paul wrote it this way in a famous passage, Romans 12, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. That's change, growth, by the renewing of your mind. We're talking about rationals today. That really sounds good to rationals. The renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. We want to grow to be more like Jesus, and if personality types can help us do that, then great. Are you with me? All right, so that's where we're headed in this series. There are 4 main types of personalities, as I said, and then 4 within those 4. So when you take the personality inventory, you'll be scored with 4 letters. And we're going to quickly run through those letters and what they mean. You're either an I or an E. You're an S or an N, a T or an F, or a J, and a J or a P. And so this is from the Myers-Briggs website. The I stands for introvert, and the E stands for extrovert. Introverts are misunderstood. All introversion means is that you get energy from being alone. Extroverts get energy from being with people. Introverts can love people. They can go to parties. I can be fun at parties. Introverts can be people. We'll see how you don't really believe that. Introverts can be people, but it just means they kind of get drained, and they just need to go be alone for a while and recharge their batteries, read a book, or go for a walk. But introverts love people. About 25% of society are introverts, about 75% extroverts. So it just means, where do you get your energy? I or E. S stands for sensing, and N stands for intuition. This is about how you process information. Sensors notice concrete details, numbers, colors, the specific look of something. Sensors look at the concrete information they see, and they take that in, and they make decisions based on that. Intuitive people, Ns, they don't really bother with the details so much. They're big picture people. They're conceptual. They're abstract people. Ns are into meaning and ideas and theories. And Ns are like, have you heard about the new theory about? And S's are like, why do you even care? They process information differently. I've been in this auditorium, true story, been in this auditorium about 5 times. I could not tell you the color of the walls until a few days ago. I'm a hardcore N. I knew when I walked into this room feels good. This is going to be an amazing place for a church service. I could not tell you the color of the walls. I'm like N off the charts. But S or N, T or F, thinking or feeling. When making decisions, do you prefer to look at just the facts and logical consistency? So you're a thinker. Or are you more likely to consider people's feelings and social situations and just kind of ebb and flow a little bit depending on who is involved? How do you make decisions, more by thinking or by feeling? J stands for judging and P stands for perceiving. The judging has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the pop definition of judge. Like, who are you to judge me? Has nothing to do with that. Judging in the Myers-Briggs concept means that I'm the kind of person who likes structure. And I like to make a decision. I don't want to search forever. I won't search for information, but I will eventually want to make a decision and have structure. P, perceiving, means that I'm naturally just more open, always kind of searching. I prefer that things are more open-ended and flexible and unstructured. So the J and the P. So if you've taken the test already, when you got the 4 letters, did they make sense to you? I hear some uh-huhs. They kind of helped you to see, oh yeah, I do that. That's true. Now at the same time, sometimes when you take the test, and it's a spectrum, you might be an I but really close to an E. Anybody have that experience? Or a T but really close to an F. That's true of me. And so you could read one profile and think, oh, that's kind of me, but then you'd have to read another profile. So I test as an INTJ, but I'm really close to an INFJ, and sometimes I'm close to an ENTJ. And so instead of just reading one profile and taking that on, even if it's not true, this is very important. Some of us don't have quite as strong a sense of our identities as others do. And if we take a test like this and we read a profile, and even if it doesn't quite fit, we make it fit, that's not what you want to do. You want to use this to help you not fit into whatever this says. See, your personality is probably bigger than one category. Your personality kind of bleeds into other categories, and you can learn about yourself by reading other profiles, not just the one. Here are the 4 types we're talking about in this series. Today we're talking about rationals. If you have an N and a T in your test, you're a rational. You're an intuitive thinker. Next week we're talking about idealists. If you have an N and an F in your 4-letter code, you're an idealist. You're an intuitive feeler. June 15, which is Men's Day here at One Church, Father's Day, we're talking about guardians. If you have an S and a J in your 4-letter code, you're a sensing judger, a guardian. And then we'll wrap it up on June 22nd with artisans. If you have an S and a P, you're a sensing perceiver. And so that's, you know when to come, basically, to hear about your own personality profile. So now, the rest of the sermon, we're going to do an overview of rationals. And you could purchase, please understand me, you could go online. There are 3 websites in your sermon notes section that you could go to and learn more about your specific personality. We won't be able to go into depth. This is really an overview. And my hope is if this is successful in helping you to explore some of these things in your life, who you are, and what your strengths and weaknesses are, and how you can relate better and grow more, and you go out and you look at other resources, then great, right? But we're going to do an overview in this series. So today we're talking about rationals. Rationals make up about 10% of the population. There are more of some types than others. Rationals are the smallest group, about 10% of the population. My guess is there's a higher percentage of rationals in one church than in society in general. Why do you think that might be? If we say questions and doubts welcome, that's attractive to people who are rational. So my guess is there are more rationals here than in the larger society. So the chances are you're either a rational, not irrational, a rational, right? Or you're married to a rational, God help you. And because I can say that because I am one of them. And maybe it's still mean to say that, even though I am one of them. I'm sorry, rationals. Or you know somebody who's a rational. You have friends who are rationals. You definitely have people in your church family who are rationals. And if we looked at church history, we would see that sometimes there can be a very ugly relationship between the church and rationals. It becomes very, very important to understand who is in our church family and value them and meet each other where we are. Rationals are intuitive thinkers. Again, intuition means, the N means they get the big picture. They are, they like concepts, they like ideas, they like meaning. They're not so much into details. Thinking means they want to make decisions by logic. What makes sense? Are there some things in religions around the world, including Christianity, that some rationals might have a hard time with? Rationals are intuitive thinkers. They see the big picture and connections, but they want things to make sense. They prefer thinking over feeling. Rationals are the most confident, these generalities, most self-confident and independent of the types. Rationals are people who think very, very deeply about their experience of the world. And because they have thought through it so deeply, they feel like they're right. And sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. But that makes rationals the most independent and self-confident of the types. An introverted rational is likely to have books lying around the house. Anybody have stubbed toes or have fallen tripping over rationals' books lying around the house? Into research, into gaining new information. A rational is on a continual search for new information. Here are the 4 types of rationals. The ENTJ field marshal. These names come from Kiersey. I love these names. These are the natural leaders, the visionary leaders of the world, the leaders of leaders. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Jack Welch, ENTJ. INTJ mastermind, introverted intuition. These are planners, strategic planners, always contingency plans. There are many famous INTJs in any category, really. ENTP inventor, coming up with new ideas and promoting them. INTP, architect, envisioning systems. A lot of philosophers would fit into that role, seeing the big picture and distilling it down into something that is simple and easy to understand. Here are the characteristics of rationals. Rationals are visionaries. Again, they see the big picture, so they can see how complex things right now could work together to build a better future. They can kind of see into the future and project and say, oh, this is how I think it's going to go. Because of that, they're good strategists. They can come up with a vision. Well, I think this is a good direction for our church or for our business or for our family. This is how our family could grow. And they can just kind of see where they need to go in the future and come up with a strategy, a step-by-step believable plan to get there. Because they question and they make decisions based on logical consistency in thinking. They're natural skeptics. Rationals are the most skeptical of all the types. Because of that, they're nonconformists. Rationals aren't going to do something just because that's the way it's done, or that's the way it's been done before. When we talk about career, that can come into play, and where you work, the kind of company you're in. Or there are a lot of rationals who are entrepreneurs or self-employed because they're nonconformists. Again, we said they're self-confident. Rationals value being calm, staying calm under pressure. Again, it's a great quality for leadership. They're always seeking knowledge, and because of that, rationals generally make good leaders. That doesn't mean that other types don't make good leaders. It's just something true about rationals. Vision and mission and being about a cause that rationals really believe in is extremely important to rationals. Talking about the bigger ideas of life, whether they be scientific theories or moral ideas, whatever, it's extremely important. Rationals will die on the vine if rationals don't have some kind of time and connection to something bigger and be able to figure it out and talk about those things. After college, I worked as an intern in Kansas City. I told this story a few months ago. And I had been a part of a new church, kind of like this, where we just kind of blew the doors open. And we can do things differently than a lot of churches do them. And we saw all kinds of lives change, and people came in who were new, who never darkened the doors of your typical church. And I just caught the bug. I loved the idea of starting a new church. And after I was involved in that during college, and then after college, I went to Kansas City to be an intern in a church that was completely different from the new church I'd been a part of. It was an older, established church. There were some good people there. It's just the truth is there was absolutely no sense of direction or vision or mission. Why are we here? I don't know. It seemed like a good place to drive to today. That was just kind of the feeling. We're here because we were here last week, and that's what we do. And there didn't, it sounds harsh, but it's just, there was just no, those of you who've had experiences like this, where you've been a part of an inward-focused organization, it could be a company. You're like, we need to go get new business. And I'm like, nah, let's just hang out. I mean, it'll kill you if you're irrational. And I was in a church like this, and I just felt stuck. I'd moved, hundreds of miles away to be in this internship. I thought it was going to be an amazing experience. It was not an amazing experience. I was dying on the vine. I needed to be a part of something I believe in that's connected to the bigger picture, that I want to make a difference for Jesus in my world. And I want to be a part of a group that operates with vision and mission and strategy, and that's on fire about that, and they're committed to it, and they think deeply about it, and they do it. I needed to be a part of something like that. And it eventually became obvious that's not going to work. And if you remember me telling the story before, if you've been here long enough, I resigned on the morning of 9/11. As the attacks were happening, our staff meeting was on a Tuesday morning, and I'm listening to the radio as I'm driving to the church building, and resigned that morning from that job. And I was in a low place. It had already been a tough year. I had a broken engagement that year, graduated college, moved away from friends, and it was tough. And I kept hearing about this church called the Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. And I would hear random people talk about it, like at the gas station. Somebody's like getting their change. It was my church, Church of the Resurrection. What's going on there? And a friend of mine had visited there, and he knew something about it. The final straw was in the cereal aisle in a grocery store. And a couple of ladies looking at Cheerios were talking about the Church of the Resurrection. And I said, this seems like something's going on here. Somebody's operating with vision and mission here. So this was a Thursday. I went back to my apartment and got on this relatively new thing called the internet. and found out where this Church of the Resurrection was. And it was a 10-year-old church, started in 1990. I drove to it on a Thursday afternoon. I was at a low place in life. I needed hope. I needed something. I drove to the church building. I pulled up and I saw it was a big church building. Actually, the inside of it looked like this. And at that point, after about 10 years, it was a church of maybe 5,000 people, grown incredibly quickly, but not the typical mega church where things might be watered down. It was a church where thinking people felt welcome. But I noticed in the parking lot that there was this building that, it's big for a church building, but it was sitting on maybe like 140 acres of land. Just this massive plot of undeveloped land. And there were roads going to the church building. I knew it was connected somehow. Like somebody's leading with vision here. Somebody has an idea of like what's going on in life is important. And there are people who need a church where they can think and they can be themselves. And somebody's doing this. And I walked inside. And right above the entrance to the worship auditorium was a plaque that said, "Let us never forget our purpose." I was hooked. Just to give you an idea of where I was and how important this was to me, I went back out to my car. And I test as a rational, a thinker. Right? I went back to my car and I cried in the parking lot. Those of us who are rationals and in a sense of vision and mission and doing something important and being connected to the big picture, maybe you can understand that. That's how important it was for me at that time in my life to see examples of the kind of church that we're trying to create here. And that church has continued to grow. The pastor actually gave the sermon at the president's inauguration last year, so he's doing okay. He's doing okay for himself. But it was such an inspiration because I saw that a group of people is leading with vision and mission. And right now, we sit in an auditorium that seats 500 people. And yet we had to take down a curtain. That's cool. But there's a lot of space in here that we don't fill up. At any given weekend this summer, 25% of our congregation is going to be on vacation. So we're going to look even smaller than usual. Somebody could walk through these doors, and they could think, wow, that church is really small to meet in a room that big. Are they wasting the space? Like, who do they think they are? It's really, wow. For me, this auditorium is a symbol of vision and mission and hope for the future. There are people, they may not be pastors, and it may not be exactly the same, but there are people in the Southeast Valley of Phoenix who have stories like many of you have shared. I was on the internet searching for a church because I couldn't stomach what I had experienced before. I wanted to raise my kids in a church they won't be embarrassed of when they're older. I wanted to be a part of something that's part of the solution and not the problem. I can't ignore my questions and doubts anymore. And they are hurting right now. We don't know what they look like yet. We don't know their names yet, but they're there. They're around us in the valley, and there needs to be space for them. This room, for me, is a symbol of vision. Are you with me? That God has hopes and dreams for this church. Thank you for the applause. I appreciate that. That God has hopes and dreams for this church. And that because he loves the people who are just like us, who are searching. And this room, for me, is a symbol of vision. Okay, relationships, career, and spiritual life. Let's talk about rational relationships. What is it like to be in a relationship with a person who is a strategic visionary, a logical thinker, a skeptic, a nonconformist, and is independent and always thinks he's right? You just ask my wife, and she'll tell you all about what that's like. That can be, for those of you who are married to rationals or have close friends who are rationals, that can be similar to your experience. Listen to what David Kiersey writes about rational relationships. This just kind of cracks me up. Rationals make wonderful mates. They're loyal, uncomplaining, I love this, warmly sexual. As opposed to what, exactly? Coldly asexual. Honest and above board in their communication, and not in the least possessive. He's an honest guy, apparently. But for all the satisfactions they bring to a marriage, establishing romantic relationships with rationals usually requires more time and energy than with other temperaments. Even the outgoing rationals, although apparently easy to get to know, are fairly difficult to get close to, for their personality structure is characteristically complex and at times hidden from view. So if you are in a relationship with a rational, It might be difficult for you at times. Some of you might feel strangely validated right now, affirmed in your experience if you're married to a rational, if you have a close friend who is. But here are a couple of things. Again, this is just an overview, and you could go to these websites and read. You could purchase a book, and the different personality types interact with each other differently. Like a rational guardian relationship is different from a rational artisan relationship. You could have serious breakthroughs and aha moments in your relationship. If you've been together for a long time, you still could if you want to delve into this material. But here are a couple of things that are extremely important for rational relationships. Rationals are primarily looking for a mind mate, not necessarily a soulmate. That might be an idealist we'll talk about next week, but rationals are looking for a mind mate. And that's somebody that a rational can have a conversation with about big ideas that are really meaningful to them. Could be politics, religion, could be science, could be theories, whatever it is. But big ideas that are extremely important to rationals. And if you're not a rational, you'd be like, why would anybody care about that thing? But it's extremely important to rationals to have somebody to talk to about those things. So I know a couple who were dating, and they definitely loved each other. He was a rational, she was an artisan. So a rational, intuitive thinker with an artisan sensor perceiver. He loved the fact that she liked to have fun, and she was adventurous, and everything was always a party with her. And she helped him to lighten up and have fun. And she appreciated the fact that he was a deep thinker, and he was an achiever, and a really intelligent guy. But as they went on in their dating relationship, and they're getting more serious, he finally admitted something to her that he hadn't said to her before. And this is something that can happen with rationals. They might hold it in for a while before they say how they really feel. He admitted to her that he felt a lack of connection with her because they didn't really have conversations about the things that are really important to him. He loved her so much, and they were a lot of fun, and they did a lot of great things together, and she's a smart person, but they didn't necessarily talk about the things that were really important to him, and it became an issue. Now, they were eventually able to resolve it. They're married now. But what happened was, just some skills had to be learned. He had to go a little easier on her, first of all, and realize she's just not as interested in these things as he is. But what she did, and God bless her, she started to listen to him talk. Tell me about what's important to you. What are some things you really want to talk about? And she went and started Googling. Isn't that amazing? That's love right there. An artisan Googling something that a rational wants to talk about. And finding out a little bit more about those subjects. And watching the news a little bit. And then at dinner, he brings something up. And she could hang with him in the conversation. She was never going to know or care about it as much as he did. But she was able to converse with him. And what an amazing gift to have somebody like that for a rational. Somebody who will, just learn a little bit about those important things that they need to talk about. A lot of rational relationships, in my experience as a pastor and knowing people, if they experience rocky times, that'd be the first thing I would look at. Whoever we have here who is a rational in a relationship with somebody, that'd be the first thing I look at. Is there a conversation? Is there a mind mate connection about the things that rational really feels is important? Because a lot of times rationals will hold it in for a while and may not express, hey, I don't feel a connection. She thought everything was cool because they were having a good time and she felt connected, but he didn't. And so if you're rational, you want to make sure you're honest, that you actually do talk about some feelings and get it out there and say, I love you, and maybe I just need this from you. And then at the same time, those of us who are rationals could give grace and just say, this person's never going to care about this. 99% of the world's not going to care about this as much as we do, but it takes a lot of love, but they could help us and talk about us or talk about those things with us. Secondly, and it's something that is a major factor in rational relationships, are that rationals are independent. They're loyal. Remember, we talked about that earlier, but they're independent. So at times, it can appear, if you're in a relationship with a rational, that they're distant from you. Independence can be perceived as distance. And does he or she really love me? Like, are they as into this as I am? Are they as committed to this relationship as I am? Sometimes they don't want to hang out as much as I do, and they want to go be on the computer or something. Like, am I as important as books? And sometimes people who are in a relationship with a rational can feel like that. And it's just important to note for that person that, rationals are very, very independent, but they're also loyal. Now, of course, this is a general truth, and unfortunately, there are exceptions to that. There are rationals who have not been loyal spouses or friends. Unfortunately, that's true. But as a general rule, rationals eventually would tend to be honest about how they're feeling rather than be unfaithful, generally. Rationals are generally trustworthy mates. They want to make it work. They're committed to self-improvement. A lot of times they really are committed to the relationship, even if they don't communicate it the way that somebody else might like to hear it. But rationals are often independent. So for a rational, if you're the rational in the relationship, it might be good to be aware that, sometimes we can be perceived as distant or cold, or the truth is even aloof or arrogant. It's not a very attractive word. But rationals can be perceived that way by other people who don't understand. We're just thinking about stuff. It's not arrogance, we're just thinking about stuff. But other people might perceive it as distance. And so we could kind of go the extra mile to make sure we communicate how much I love you, how great of a job you're doing. I really appreciate what you did there, and verbalize some feelings that other people can connect to and feel closer to us and know that we want to be close to them. All right, rational relationships. Moving on to career. Again, this is just an overview. There is so much information on those websites in your worship handout or in the Please Understand Me book. We'll just spend a couple of minutes here because rationals typically have a good idea of what they want to do with their lives. Maybe younger, maybe like teenagers, not so much. But as rationals get older, they usually have little tolerance for a career that is not fulfilling to them. So being a visionary, strategic thinker, nonconformist, a big idea person, natural leader, self-confident, where rationals will run into trouble in a career is working in a company or organization where there isn't a whole lot of room to move. If you're a big idea person and you like coming up with new, more efficient means of accomplishing something, and you're in a company that's like, well, these are the established policies, and this is how we do it because that's how we've always done it, that's not going to work out very well for a rational. A rational is going to get burned pretty quickly by inefficiency, and if something doesn't make sense. Rationals believe that rules are there because maybe at one time they worked, but the rules can be changed. We can change the policies. We can streamline procedures. And so if you're a rational and you're uncomfortable in your career, maybe that's why. Maybe it's just not quite pushing the buttons for you, the big ideas and the new thinking. So rationals tend to be great in careers like science. Basically, any famous scientist you can think of, there's a good chance they're rational. Technology, again, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. Engineering, philosophy, law, teaching, leadership, entrepreneurial, business, leadership in any kind of an organization. Of course, rationals could be happy in other careers, but here are just some of them. Rationals tend to be achievers and demanding of the people around them. For a rational, maybe if you're a rational, you can identify with this, maybe you can't. And I'll speak from my own heart here. The downside of being an achiever is that you may feel like you're always on the brink of failure. If you talk and you got a rational to really open up about how he or she feels in this career pursuit or what they're about, rationals are extremely hard on themselves. Like our own worst critics by far. And a rational can be driven to achieve so much that the person's never happy. It's just never enough. And they always feel like, man, if I let up one bit, I'm going to fail. And how that can work out in a rational's life, as you might guess, is workaholism. There are children of rational parents who might say, you know what, Dad was just never around. Mom was just never around. They're always working. And I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that because I've been blessed with other people who told me to watch out for that. And I've actually heard this, it's taken a lot of work to get ready for this room. My son, a few days ago, said to me, he's 3 years old, he said, I want Daddy to work a whittle, not a what. And oh man, that'll get you. And it just speaks to this need to achieve. And sometimes for a rational, it's okay to just kind of dial it back a little bit. You don't have to work 20 hours a day to not be a failure. You've done a great job. It's going to be okay. Self-criticism, it can be destructive. You can sabotage yourself before you even succeed in whatever it is you want to do with being so critical. So quickly here, before we move on, here's some famous rationals. In the sciences, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Marie Curie, Einstein, Carl Sagan, Sally Ride. Philosophy, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Ayn Rand, government, politics, Augustus Caesar. I don't think Caesar took the Myers-Briggs either, but they're just like looking back at historical figures. Based on what we know about these people, they look like rationals. Napoleon, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. Oh, you want to create a new country? Okay, well, we can do that. You know, a lot of the founding fathers were rationals. Abraham Lincoln. Oh, you want to save that country? We can do that. Booker T. Washington, Eisenhower, Margaret Thatcher, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. Leadership, church, business, Martin Luther, probably irrational. Famous pastors, Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, Maria Montessori, a new kind of education, right? Outside of the box educational model. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. Entertainment, Mark Twain, Walt Disney. Has there anybody ever been a more creative visionary than Walt Disney? Gregory Peck, Harrison Ford, Jodie Foster, Julia Stiles, Russell Crowe, the Governator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Get in the chopper. I say his name just so I can do that. Just give me a sympathy laugh at least for the, it's not a tumor. I'm doing my best. Jay-Z, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, Bible characters. I think Deborah in the Old Testament, Judges chapter 5, Deborah in the ancient Middle East was a military government leader. What? This must have been a remarkable woman. I read about Deborah in Judges chapter 5, and I think ENTJ, rational. She was an incredible leader in the ancient Middle East. I think the author of Ecclesiastes, if it's Solomon, that person is definitely irrational. I think it's quite possible the Apostle Paul would have been irrational. Very airtight arguments, logical progression of ideas, but also sees a big picture, capable of writing the love chapter. Love is patient, love is kind. But also capable of arguing with somebody and thinking he's right. The Apostle Paul, I think, may have been irrational. Any struggles in career for rationals probably has more to do with the relational aspects we just talked about. So that's career. Okay, last thing, spiritual life. Again, it's only an overview. But with rationals being skeptical, nonconformist, thinking people, you could imagine, David Kiersey actually says, rationals have the most uneasy relationship with religion. There are more atheist rationals than any other personality type. And if you look back through history, history is littered with conflicts between the church and some rationals who are willing to stand up and say, I don't think that makes sense. I don't think what you're doing there is right. I don't even think it honors your God. But there has been an uneasy relationship between religion and rationals. Rationals are not willing to stop thinking in order to be religious or to please somebody who's close to them, to please them and make them think that they're religious enough. That can be an issue in married relationships or just close relationships between somebody who really likes church and wants to have a faith community and somebody who doesn't. If it's a rational who's like, no thanks, that can create a really, an issue. Because the rational is not going to be willing to just say, well, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll go for it. That's going to be really, really tough for a rational. Rationals have heard things like, well, you just have to believe. Even if it doesn't make any sense, you just have to believe. Have blind faith. We have enough rationals here to basically testify. Does that work? No. It's not going to work for a rational. No matter how much this other person wants them to automatically change and be this, that's not going to work for a rational. Rationals are often keenly aware of history and the many times when the church has been on the wrong side of history. And rationals aren't about to be a part of that. So I've had several conversations with people in one church like this. I remember a conversation I had with a guy recently who I knew he had an uneasy relationship with spiritual things in general, including church. And he was kind enough to sit down, we grabbed coffee, and he opened up a little bit more throughout the meeting. And he's a nice guy, civil guy, and eventually got to the place where I think we had a safe enough atmosphere to where he could be blunt and just tell the truth. And he said, sometimes I'm an atheist, and sometimes I'm not. Some days I believe in God, and some days I don't. And I wanted to honor his honesty in what he was saying, and that was an important thing for him to say, and I think it was kind of hard to say it in some ways. But it's also true. I said, buddy, you're not the only one. If we were to take a secret poll of people who sit in church seats on a weekly basis, there would be many who would admit, there are times I believe, and there are times I'm not sure I do. And it's a constant struggle for me. There's a good chance those people are naturals and are rationals, and his wife is a naturally passionate, idealistic, spiritual person. And she just wants this for him, but he's just like, I can't quite, I don't know. I have so many questions and doubts. And so I told him about many people I've known who were atheists or agnostics, or they were church-going Christians, but they just had struggles with their questions and doubts. And I just said, man, I know so many people who don't necessarily automatically jump at the idea of the God that you hear about in churches, but they're good people. They're moral people. A lot of times, they're really committed to being ethical people. Sometimes they want to do the right thing more than a lot of self-professing Christians. I've seen so many people that they didn't believe in God, but I thought if there's a such thing as a Christian atheist, there's one right there. Because this is a good person. And remember, we read the greatest commandment earlier. And the greatest commandment is not figure out all your questions and doubts. A lot of times in churches, that's the message people hear. That is not the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is love. And there are people who have all kinds of questions, and they're not sure what they believe, but they do know this. They're committed to love. And the loving God part, well, I don't know, but God stands for goodness and truth and beauty and human dignity and doing what is right. Now, I know lots of people who have questions and doubts about God, but they're committed to that. You know what I'm talking about? You know people like that? They're committed to that. And they do want to love their neighbors as themselves. They want to do the right thing. Sometimes they're more about social justice than self-professing Christians. I know lots of people who aren't totally sure what they believe. But you know what? God is my judge. And I'll answer for everything I say and I teach. I believe that someday. I think there are an awful lot of people who may not quite fit into the good religious mold according to everything they believe. But I think God might let them in because they were committed to the main thing. They couldn't be dishonest. They couldn't say, I don't have those questions and doubts. But even in spite of that, they were committed to love, the main thing that God is all about anyway. I have a hard time picturing a good, fair, and just God standing, before, a person standing before that God. And that God says, you just didn't have all your questions figured out, or you just didn't go with blind faith. So, sorry, out of luck. I just have a hard time envisioning God doing that. It's easier for me to see this. If God were to say, I'm glad that you didn't betray your brain. A lot of harm and destruction has been committed because people didn't think. And I'm glad that you were faithful to what you believed was right, and you were committed to love. You wanted to love goodness and truth and beauty and all the things that I created and stand for, and you were committed to loving your neighbor as yourself. And so I said to this guy, that's why I plaster on everything I see, questions and doubts welcome. You can't walk 10 feet in one church without seeing questions and doubts welcome somewhere. That's why we do that. Because I think that God is a good, fair, and just God. And that God welcomes rationals. People who have questions and doubts that they can't quite sort out. And I didn't read this blog post to him, but I told him about it, and I'm going to close with this. I told him about a blog post I wrote the day that Christopher Hitchens died. Christopher Hitchens was a famous atheist, probably irrational, who passed away on December 16th, 2011, after a battle with cancer. He was very outspoken and really an opponent of religion, and a member of the New Atheist with Richard Dawkins and folks like that. But here's the blog post that I wrote about Christopher Hitchens, and I told this guy about it. Hitchens is one of the most outspoken atheists in contemporary culture. Some religious people villainize atheists as the enemy. I disagree. As a matter of fact, it may surprise some to know that I have enjoyed reading these authors. I am thankful for the role that Hitchens played as one who questioned Not only religious belief itself, but more importantly to me, the practice of accepting beliefs without examination. Hitchens and the other new atheist authors simply question what many do not. While some of their points are straw man arguments against the worst examples of religious practice, they have also helped me to think about what I believe and why. They are often overly provocative, but in a world of hype and anti-intellectualism, I appreciate anyone who makes me think. A couple more paragraphs. Throughout history, people like Hitchens have protested evil committed in the name of religion. And because of dissenters like them, religious and government institutions have been challenged to reform. Specific to church history, ironically, it has at times been the preaching of atheists that resulted in Christians acting more Christianly. Stating it as clearly as I am able, I believe that all religious people would benefit from being exposed to the thoughts of Christopher Hitchens. In a post-9/11 world, we realize that it is dangerous to hold beliefs that one has never questioned. More personally, my faith means more to me now, and this is so true, than it did before I allowed myself to test it. Hitchens helped me to examine my faith. Someone as intelligent as Christopher Hitchens is hard to stump, but I like to imagine that it would make him scratch his head for a moment to hear that I am a better Christian because of him. And the conversation with the guy, what was important to him was this. He said, if I could have a church community where I could be honest and I don't have to pretend, then I'm down with that church community. And he is. And I've discovered that a lot of rationals get turned off to God because barriers are erected by other people, and they just simply aren't willing to jump over them because they know it's not right. But if you create an atmosphere of love, where we say we can be honest about these struggles and these questions and doubts that we have, then rationals can have a whole new world of possibilities and all kinds of new options of thinking about these big picture concepts of life that rationals like to think about anyway, the meaning of life and what's it all about, and continually seek truth and self-improvement like rationals love to do. And they can have an atmosphere at church where they're free to do that and think through these big issues. We're going to take communion together in a moment. And communion is a dramatization of Jesus giving himself out of his love for God and other people.